Hello and good evening, CSI 258, Section 847 students for the second 8-week term at Anne Arundel Community College in the spring 2015 semester. This is going to be a Packet Tracer tutorial on Packet Tracer Activity 8.1.2.5, where we're going to be configuring syslog and NTP, and that's the Network Time Protocol. So we're going to configure the syslog service, we're going to generate some events, we're going to manually set some clocks, then we're going to turn the NTP service on, and then we're going to verify time-stamped logs. I'm also going to go into some detail of how I actually set production equipment up that I deploy with respect to a lot of the logging information that gets generated to make sure that I get the most verbose and valuable information out of the logs in case I have to troubleshoot anything. Alright, so let's go ahead. It says enable the syslog server. So let's pull up our syslog server here. And remember, the syslog server could be a WhatsUp Gold is a software suite that you can use. SolarWinds is another software suite that you can use. Cisco Prime is one that you can use. And basically, it's going to be installed on a server to which you're then going to log the messages off of your PC. I'm sorry, not PC, router or switch. So we've got the Services tab up here, so we're just going to click on to turn syslog on. You'll see there's no messages to clear out, right? So we've just turned on the syslog server. So what we've done here is this server is now listening on UDP port 514 for syslog messages that are going to be generated by our components here, router 1, switch 2. And when those messages are generated, they're going to be shipped over to the syslog server. Let's see, we've got the services on, and we'll keep that window up. So let's configure the intermediary devices to use that service. So let's jump on router 1 first, and we'll bring the window down here, make it a little larger, and we'll go up here. All right, so I'm on the CLI for router 1, so I'm going to go from user exec to privilege exec with the enable command, and then we're going to jump into global config with the configure terminal command, and we're simply going to turn logging on. So I'm going to say logging 10.0.1.254, right? And I'll hit enter. So if I type end, you'll notice that I'm on a router here, and so as soon as I type end and exit from global config, we actually get a couple of logging messages here. So the first thing that we're going to get here is sort of what is referred to as the facility, right? So what facility is it? This is the system facility. The next output that we get here is the severity level. So level 5, right? If you remember from the reading, level 5 is going to be your notification level, right? So level 5 is a notification level, and it's normal, but it's a significant condition. And then you've got level 6, right? So after notification, you've got informational. So we've got a notification severity and we have an informational severity message, both related to the system facility, right? So this is the facility to which the message applies or is related to. And then we have a mnemonic, right? It's just simply it's a text string that's giving us some information about what this message details. So this is configure, right? So something was configured, and then we've also got at our level 6, which is our informational level, we've got a logging host start stop. So the mnemonic on the informational tells us that logging on this host has either started or stopped. If we look a little further down here on the description part of the message, you can clearly see that logging has started. And again, logging to host 10.0.1.254, that's our syslog server, on UDP port 514. It was initiated by the CLI, and that process has started, right? So again, we've got the facility, we've got the severity, we've got a mnemonic, and then we have a description that hopefully, if we're having to troubleshoot something and we're looking into things, we could take a look at this and easily decipher what just happened on the router. So if I were to say show logging and hit enter, you can see if I roll back up a little bit here, it says syslog logging is enabled. right? No active message discriminators. And then we're going to come a little further down here, and this is what we're looking for. So trap logging, right? Level is informational, which means, and the 6 right here, this is 6 message lines logged. That is not the 6 from the severity level. But we know that level informational is going to log messages from level 6 or higher. And when I say higher, I'm referring to the severity level, not the numeric value we use as the descriptor. So when I say level 6 or higher, I mean that we're going to log informational at level 6, notification at level 5, warning at level 4, error at level 3, critical at level 2, and alert at level 1, and then finally emergency at level 0. And so when I say higher, I'm talking about higher, climbing the syslog severity level from the very bottom level, which is level 7, which is debugging, all the way to the top, excuse me, to level 1, which is our emergency level. So again, this is how I would want to log, or this is how I can check to see what level I'm logging and where are those messages being logged to. And you can see again here, UDP port 514, right? So again, if I type show logging, you can see we don't have anything that's being logged just yet, right? Because we haven't set up anything to log to the buffer. Now we're logging to the console, right? We see the messages coming to the console, but let's see if we can set that here. There we go. Logging buffered, right? And we'll go ahead and make it a decent size. 1, 2, 3, 32,000 bytes. And then we've got, that's it. So I'll say logging buffered 32,000. So, and what we'll see here later on is when we start to bring interfaces up and down in our equation here, we're going to see that those messages get logged to the system buffer, right? As well as to our syslog host. Okay, so we've got that set up on router 1. Let's step over to switch 1 and 2 here, and let's get these guys underway and configured. And again, that logging buffered that I just did, that's not required by the exercise. I'm just adding that in here because in the real world, you're definitely going to want to have a log of the messages on the router or the switch, whatever component you're on, as well as being sent to a syslog server. All right, so we'll start with switch 2 here. We're going to do much of the same. We're going to type enable to get to privilege exec from user exec, config terminal to get to global config mode, where we're going to go ahead and add that same logging command in 10.0.1.254. Now, you'll notice I'm going to type end, and immediately we get the message has been logged again. So, but it's being logged to the console, right? So this is logging to the console, because if I were to type in show log, you can see there's no message there, right? It doesn't show me, and where the messages would occur would be after this right here. So if I were to come over here, and this is actually a switch that I use, sort of my quote-unquote production switch, but if I were to say show logging, right, you see we get all of these messages down here, right? And there's just a ton, and this duplex mismatch is because I've got something plugged in that's hanging off of a Juniper switch that's then coming across to this switch. So, but anyway, you can see here I've added some additional things in, and we'll talk about some of these as we go along. But again, here is the same format, right? I've got a sequence number here, right? And you remember from the reading, if you did the service sequence numbers, I love the sequence numbers. I love to be able to look at the sequence numbers to determine, okay, 463, this is the 464th message. It gives me a sense of kind of order in looking at the messages, but it also tells me how many syslog messages I'm actually buffering on the router, right? So if we were to go down to the bottom, we could see that I've got 538 messages that I've received since this log was last cleared or since the router was last rebooted. So there's my sequence numbers, right? And that was that service sequence numbers command. We'll look at that in a second. And then I've got my timestamp, right? May 10th, 2015. And I get a very nice detailed timestamp here. Okay, I've got hours, minutes, seconds, down to the milliseconds, along with my time zone. And I'm going to show you, some additional options that we can use with the timestamp, the service timestamps command to get these things on here. And then here's my facility, right? So the facility is SSH. So this is a message being generated by the SSH facility on the router. Or I'm sorry, this is a switch, on the switch. And what level is it? Well, it's level 5. It's not it's notification, right? So that's our notification level, level 5. It's normal, but it's a significant condition, and we want to know a little bit more. Here's the mnemonic. It's an SSH2 session, and what do we have? It's a request coming into TTY0 using CryptoCipher AES 256, HMAC SHA-1, and it succeeded, right? So this gives us some great information. You can also see here, these are what you want to watch out for. If you've got a lot of login failed, you probably want to know where those are coming from, right? And excuse me. And these log messages, again, they keep them in order by sequence number, and they're giving us the date timestamp with all of the information included, the mnemonic, as well as the facility, the severity, and the description, right? And so again, this is a little more realistic as to what you might expect to see in a real environment. All right, so we've got switch 1 and switch 2. I've just done, let's see here, let's do a show run, and you can see we have no service timestamps, right? So take a look at that. For our debugging and our logging, we've got no service timestamps turned on for anything. So it might ask us to change that. And then here's our single logging command. Right, I'm going to leave the logging buffered on the router. I'm not going to turn it on the switches. And let's go ahead and jump over to switch 1, and let's configure the syslog setting here. So we'll go from user exec to privilege exec into global config and logging 10.0.1.254. All right, so we've got our logging set up on switch 1, switch 2, router 1. Now it looks like we're going to generate some messages. So it says configure a loopback interface on router 0. So let's go ahead and say interface loopback 99. And you can see, what do we have? So here's the facility, right? It's a link facility, right? Because a link has been brought up. It's level 5, and again, level 5 is our notification level. And what's the mnemonic? What is it? What's this message trying to tell us here? Well, it's that a link has changed. And it has, right? Because interface loopback 99, the state has changed to up, because it wasn't up before this. In fact, it didn't even exist prior to that command that we just ran, this int loopback 99. So then we get another facility message, right? So the link is changed to up, but then the line protocol comes up. We get level 5 again for notification that it's an up-down. So it's either up or down. Something has happened. So let's check. In the description, line protocol change state to up, right? So what if I type shut? What would you expect to see? Do you think we're going to see two messages here? One telling us that it's changed the state, the link state has gone down, but then the line protocol, it's still going to say notification for 5, right? So it's going to be severity level 5, and it's going to say up, down, but it's going to say change state to down. So let's see if it's going to be the same severity level, right, which is going to be level 5 notification, and then let's see if it's going to have the same facility line protocol along with the same mnemonic. So I'll just say shut. And sure enough, there we have it, right? So we've got our facility, which is a link, notification level 5, mnemonic that something's changed, it's changed to administratively down. Our description gives us more information. And then here's our line protocol facility, severity level 5 notification. Again, notification meaning that it's not a crisis, right? It's not an emergency. It's not critical. It's normal, but it's a significant condition. And an interface going up and down is definitely a condition that you want to be aware of. It is significant. And then line protocol on the interface has changed state to down, right? All right, so it wants us to bring it up. So we'll say no shut. And again, we get our messages. So let's see, I configured logging buffered. However, did it capture anything? Remember before when we did the do show log, right? It showed us, and I'm sorry, do show logging. Remember, it showed us this before, and then it brought us here, and it says trap logging level is informational, so level 6 and higher, but not higher numerically, higher in terms of severity. So they have an inverse relationship, right? So the lower the severity number, the higher the level of the severity. Okay, so, but let's continue on here. Let's keep hitting enter, and it actually did not log anything to the buffer for us like it did over here. So I'll have to take a look at that and see. Informational, it should have done that. We have buffered logging is all the way down to debugging, so that should be grabbing everything. Logging exception size, count, and timestamp is disabled. All right, let's drive on here and let's see. Make sure do show run. And I'm pretty sure I turned on. Oh, did I not put logging buffered on here? I thought I entered that in. DHCP pool. Okay, it appears that, and maybe it's logging buffered, and we'll just say 8192. Let's see if we've got that in here now. And I'm going to put in, well, we're going to put the service timestamps in a second. I'm just checking to see if, wondering if that might be why it took the logging command, but I don't see it being entered in here. Okay, and so we'll move on. We'll continue on. So what I'm looking at is I'm wondering if the fact that I've got this set up to not do the service timestamps, if that's impacting that logging buffered command, which it should take, but it's clearly not. So, and again, that's when I do the do show log, right? Like I did over here. And it wants one more G there. Yeah, so it took, so there it is. It took the logging buffered. Maybe the, let me roll back up. Maybe I had, maybe that number I had for the logging buffered was just too large initially and doesn't go back that far. So let's do this again. So let's go into interface loopback 99, and we're going to say shut, no shut, shut, clearly generating some messages here, and no shut, and then do show logging. Yeah, it's still not logging. Okay, we'll have to take a look at that and try to figure out. It may be because the service timestamps are off. And typically, I don't believe that's the default. Let's take a look here. Is router 4 configured? I've got one of these routers is not configured. In fact, it's this one right here. So if I'm on router 1, which is an 1841, Cisco 1841, we'll say show version. I think it's 15.3 code. It is. So if I were to say show run, yeah, as you can see, by default, those things are not off. I'm sure the exercise has them off because it's going to ask us to enable them. I'm just not sure if that is why the logging buffered is not actually logging or not actually buffering the messages that we're looking for. So because it says 20 message lines logged. All right, so we'll move on. We'll take a look at that in a second here. So what it wanted us to do was when we went ahead and configured the loopback, it wants us to turn PC1 off. So we'll bring PC1 over here, and we're just going to click this and say off. And then PC2 is going to get turned off. So after we turn those things off, PC1 and PC2, let's examine the syslog server. So we'll pull the syslog up, and as you can see, we've got all kinds of activity here. So let's shrink that down, and let's stretch this out. And you can see here, it looks like it's logging things, and it's tough to tell from the first thing to happen. I'm sorry, yeah, from the oldest event to the newest event here, because again, this fast Ethernet 01, that was on switch 2, 10022, right? And then here's 10011. This is the router you can see from the loopback message. And let's see, we should have, I'm sorry, so it's 10022 and then 10012. So here's switch 2, and here's switch 1's messages, and then here are all the router messages. So the way that this is displaying the output to us is that this is the most recent event. Now, this kind of dovetails nicely into our next conversation, which is how would I have known that's the order that these events were taking place in, looking on my syslog server, because look at my timestamp. The timestamp is January 1st, and it's all zeros for everything. So just looking at this, it might not be intuitive, especially if you've got hundreds of devices logging their syslog information to this syslog server, and you don't have any timestamps at all. How would you ever know which event took place? Excuse me, which event took place at which time? So let's go ahead now and talk about NTP. And does it want us to clear? Yes. Let's clear our log first. So we'll clear the log here because obviously there was a lot of stuff in there that was broken, that we had intentionally broke to generate some messages. So now we're going to manually set the switch clock. So I'm going to pull switch 1 up here, and we're just simply going to say, and it's interesting, keep in mind that this is one of those commands that I always have to remind myself, you do not go into global config to make this change. So it's just clock set, and then we're literally going to type in the time as close as we can. So I'm going to say 20:17, I'm looking up here in the upper right hand corner of my screen, 00 May 10 2015. All right, and there we go. So I tried to catch it just as my clock rolled over to 2017. So there's a couple commands we're going to run now. We've got the clock set, and that's great. So how do I see the clock? So if you were to type show clock, as you might have guessed, oops, sorry about that. So show clock, as you might have guessed, excuse me. And here is our current clock time. And now this is being shown in UTC time, right? Not Eastern Standard Time or Eastern Daylight Time for summertime, for Daylight Savings Time. So, and then we've got this asterisk here, right? And what that means is that the time is not coming from an authoritative source. In other words, we've locally set the time. We haven't picked up the time or received our time from an authoritative source. So if I were to say show clock, and let's see if we've got options here. It doesn't give us the option to take a look at another command, show clock details. So let's go back here to, and this guy here is actually tied in with a number of NTP servers. So let's go ahead and type show clock. So I'll say show clock, and you can see that the UTC time is 001826 down to the milliseconds, right? .608. There's my time zone, UTC. And UTC time, it's already rolled over, so it's May 11th UTC time, right? So if I type show clock, and I'll do a question mark here, and that was the option I was looking for, was the show clock detail. And again, it doesn't give us much more detail than it initially did. However, it gives us the one piece of information that we're looking for. You'll notice there's no asterisk here in front of my time, because my time source is Network Time Protocol, NTP, and I am receiving my time from an authoritative source, which means a source who has a better stratum than I do. And we're going to look at that here in a second. So I just wanted to explain that because a lot of learners, especially new learners, new to the Cisco world, they see the asterisk and they want to know, what does it mean? But the show clock detail command is not here in Packet Tracer to kind of give us that extra information that we can tie back to say, yeah, hey, this is an authoritative source that we're getting our information from. That's why the asterisk shows up here, because we're not. And over here, where I do have an NTP server providing the time, you don't see the asterisk. So even if I came over here to router 1, right? Router 1 has no NTP server. So what do you expect to see? The asterisk. If I type show clock detail, let's see what it says. Aha. So the time source is hardware calendar. So right now the time source is being set in hardware, because again, we ran the clock set command to go ahead and set that. So the asterisk again means that that is not an authoritative source. To be authoritative, I have to be getting it from someone else that has a better strategy. It can't be configured in hardware. It needs to be an official authoritative source, and we'll roll back to take a look here at the NTP config on this guy, where he is receiving his time from an authoritative source. So no asterisk there. All right, so switch 1, we set the clock, and let's go ahead now and jump over to switch 2, and let's do the same thing for switch 2. Let's help switch 2 out here. So we'll type enable to get the privilege exec, and whoops, sorry, we do not need to go into global config. Always need to remind myself of that. And we're simply going to go ahead and type in clock set, and our time is going to be, it looks like, I'll do 2021 colon, and we'll do 45. We'll try to, actually, yeah, 45. We'll try to catch it at 45, and we'll say May 10th, 2015. So we'll give it about 3 seconds here and get it as close as we can. There we go. So again, if I type show clock, you can see we've got the asterisk. This is not an authoritative source, right? Not an authoritative source because it's set in hardware. So what if I type in show calendar? Let's see what if this shows it. So the command's not there. So over here, if I type in show calendar, and it is not there. It should be there. Show cal? No. It's not there. Where is that at? There's typically, or is it show clock? Yeah, it should be show calendar. Huh. Interesting. Show calendar. Yeah, there we go. Huh, that's interesting that it's not on my switch. So there's another command that you can type in to catch the time, and it's the show calendar command. So just wanted to put that out there. Interesting, though, that it's not available on my 3560 switch. Let's see a 3750 switch. Is it on here? Show calendar. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Misspelled it there. Show calendar. Calendar. So show cal. Yeah, interesting that it's not on the switches, but it is on the routers. So again, show calendar is an additional command that you should definitely take note of, that you can run to see the current system date and time. All right, so switch 1 and switch 2 are set. Excuse me. So now we're going to go ahead and set up our timestamps on switch 1 and switch 2. So they give us what they want to see, and we have to be in global config to do this. So we'll type in config terminal. So service timestamps, log, date time, and milliseconds. So what does this mean? So this means for the service facility, right, when we're logging messages, I want to see a timestamp on my log messages. I want to see the date and time, and I want it down to the millisecond. And again, I believe this was off by default. And so let's go ahead and say do show run. Yeah, it looks like it was off by default. And so I'm assuming that this is why it was not logging for us earlier. We're going to find out right now, though. So you can see for debugs, right? For your debugs, I love having lots of information on my logs and my debugs. So typically the way I set it up, right, on the switch here, and this guy right here, if I say show run include date time, so I do, for both my debugging and my logging, I do the date time down to the millisecond. I want it to show me the local time as well as the time zone and the year, right? Because there's equipment I've been working on that has been around for 10, maybe 12 years and is still in service, right? So I like to make sure I've got all of these things set so that I can see and receive as much verbose information as possible in my logs. Now over here, they just had us do the timestamp, log, date, time, millisecond, and that's fine for this exercise. But additional options are available. You want to see the local time or the time zone or the year, you can certainly add those things on. And again, if I type in show log, you can see that that is the additional information that's going to get added in for you, right? So here's the time zone, and I believe I changed the time zone earlier. So it's UTC time. Here's my date timestamp down to the milliseconds, and we're going to talk about the service timestamp. I'm sorry, not service timestamp. Service sequence numbers here in a second. So we've got our config here. So now let's see if I do a do show log. Has anything been logged? Nothing's been logged yet. Nothing's happened. So we're going to come back to this and let's see if it logged that. No, it didn't log that. So we're going to keep plugging away here to see why the switches are not buffer. Oh, you know why? I don't think I configured it on this. I didn't configure it to buffer the messages, the syslog messages on the actual switches. I think I did it on the router, so we'll have to go back and take a look at the router. So first, let's go ahead and bring switch 1 up to speed. Service timestamp log date time milliseconds, right? So here we go. And let's go ahead now that we've got that set up and ready. Let's go ahead to the next step, which is configure the NTP service. Because again, it's great that we've got all that information. However, we need to make sure that it's going to be of value, that we've got legitimate time sources in play here. So we're going to open the services tab of our NTP server. So there it is. We'll say services. Come down to NTP, and we're going to click it, excuse me, to on. So what is the date and time that's been shown? It's 8/27/05, right? May 10th. Yep, so it's got May 10th, and it looks like, is it pulling it from my system? It is not. Is it pulling it from, it may be pulling it from this system. It's hard to tell because the seconds aren't here, but it's probably pulling it from this Windows virtual machine. And it is a few seconds off of the Mac clock up in the upper right there. So, but my guess is it's getting it from here, and if it rolls over to 8:28, it should do it at the exact same time here. So we've got the NTP turned on. You could do authentication, right? We are not going to be configuring NTP authentication as part of this exercise. However, you could if you wanted to. So turn on the NTP service. We've done that. The date and time is displayed. We've taken a note of that. So we've got 3 seconds here. Let's see, 8:28. No, that rolled over already before this did. So it's got, maybe it's just close to the virtual machine. All right. So let me go ahead and close that down, and we're going to go up here to router 1, and we're going to go to privilege exec, and we're going to type in show clock. So take a look at that. This is something that you will commonly run into in environments where, for whatever reason, NTP was not a priority. It was not something that was set up, and this is typically out of the box what your switcher router is going to say as the time if you did a show clock. If I come over here to router, and I think we set the clock. So I set the clock there. How about here? Let's do show clock. Yeah, no, it was set there. I'm trying to find one of these where it might not have been set. No, it was set there. How about switch 2? Because it would say the same thing. I'm just trying to show that, yeah, no, these guys have all been set. So what I was trying to show was that this date right here, this date timestamp, Monday, March 1st, 1993, will show up by default out of the box on your Cisco routers and switches, and you definitely want to make sure that you change that and update it to a legitimate time source. So again, here we go, a non-authoritative source, and this shows it's 0:4315.191, right down to the millisecond, and it's UTC time. However, the NTP server, if we remember, what time did it show? It's showing about right around 8:29. So by the time we get done, it should be around 8:30. So let's go ahead now, and we're going to go ahead and go into global config mode, and we're going to configure the NTP server as 64.103.224.2. So we're basically telling router 1, we want you to refer to the NTP server to get your time, and it's going to sync your time up. So we'll go ahead and hit enter. And again, how do we check our time? I can type in show clock. Oops, sorry, do show clock. And there we go. And so we were about 16 seconds after 8:30, right? And it's UTC time, and take a look at that. Everything looks good. However, it's still saying that it's coming from a non-authoritative source. Now, this may be something that is specific to Packet Tracer in terms of it not removing the asterisk. How do you configure, or how do you confirm your NTP settings? If I type show NTP status, this would be the first command that you would want to run. And let's take a look here. So it says the clock is synchronized stratum 2, which would definitely be an authoritative source. It gives me the reference, right? So what NTP server am I using to get my information? And it's 64.103.224.2. Now, something that you may run into that you should be aware of is if you're going from a time like this, a date time where this is clearly 22 years in the rear view mirror, right? 22 years in the past, and you configure the NTP server, Packet Tracer conveniently brought us right up to where we're supposed to be. Typically, if your skew is so far outside the realm of being even close to the NTP server, you may have challenges where it's not going to synchronize. So what you should do is try to set your clock and get it as close to a legitimate time as possible, and then you would see that it's going to synchronize with the NTP server. Because there are occasions where the skew of the time on the router or switch that you're trying to synchronize up with the NTP server, it's so far outside the scope of what would be considered normal that it won't sync up. And I've had this happen to me on a number of occasions, and you just simply go in and you're going to go ahead and do your clock set, bring the time up to get it as close as possible to what the real time is, and then that NTP server is going to go ahead and give you what you're looking for with respect to an accurate time, right? Let's see if it has the show NTP associations. Show NTP. It just gives a status. So there's another command with NTP to be aware of. Show NTP associations. Now you can see here that the output is just as messy, as the show NTP status output, although we do have a nice little legend down here. So the asterisk means that it's a system peer. The hash, or the pound sign would mean selected. The plus sign means it's a candidate. Then you've got the outlier, so this one is considered as an outlier, and it gives you the reference clock, right? The stratum, so strata 2, strata 2, strata. So these are good time sources to have. I believe these are the Google NTP servers that I'm using here, and this is the one that I'm currently using, I believe. So show NTP status. Is that the one I'm currently using? 3215. It is. Right? And so you can see clock is synchronized. The stratum is 3 because the actual stratum is 2. However, it adds 1 when I go to get the time, and it makes it stratum 3 because I could turn around. I could turn this switch into an NTP server, and I could have it provide NTP information for, you know, boxes on my network. So that's why it increments the stratum up to 3, right? So show NTP associations, another very, very good command to keep in your toolkit when you're dealing with NTP. So we've got the router now set up on what is an authoritative source, that NTP server that's out there. Even though we're still seeing the asterisk here, this has got to be a function of Packet Tracer just not removing the asterisk or recognizing that NTP server as being authoritative. Okay. So now let's get down to configuring R1 to send its timestamp information with the logs, right? Because when we looked at the logs earlier, we had no time. Well, we had timestamp information, but it was completely ambiguous and absolutely useless from a troubleshooting perspective. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and say conf t to get into global config, and we're going to use that same service timestamp, and let's see what we've got for our logs, right? Not our debugging. We're going to do our date time, and we're going to do it all the way down to the millisecond level. All right, so we've got that done on our router. Now it wants us to re-enable. I just did loopback 99, so we'll go into loopback 99. And I'm going to go ahead and say shut, and you can see we get our messages there. And take a look. What's a little different between these messages now? What's at the beginning of the message? There is my date timestamp down to the milliseconds, right? So before it started with the facility, right? % link, the severity level 5 for our notifications, and then it went into the mnemonic, and then it showed us the description. And this was all we had before. We configured service timestamps for our logging to show the date time all the way down to the milliseconds, and now we end up with this. May 10th, 20:35:39 dot, and down, right down to the millisecond level. And now that's what's being logged for all of our messages. So it says re-enable and then disable the loopback. So then we're going to say shut. Or did I shut? I'm sorry. I did shut it. So let's say no shut. And bring it up, and it wants us to leave it in the shut state. So we'll say shut, and we'll leave it shut down. So now we're going to turn off laptops L1 and L2. So we'll turn the laptop off here. And we'll turn off laptop L2, and this is going to generate syslog messages on switch 1 and switch 2, which should also be sending their date time information over to the syslog server. Now you'll notice we're at 100 out of 100, but let's dig a little deeper here. Let's take a look at the syslog server and the syslog events that we're seeing. And I'm actually going to take up as much real estate as I can here. All right, so now take a look at the date timestamp area. May 10, 20:37, 12, down to the millisecond, right? So this gives us, I can actually look at this and determine from looking at this that this happened, this is my oldest message, right? And this is my newest syslog message. I can see the host, let's bring this a little closer here. I can see the host that sent the message to me, so 10.0.22, that's switch 2. We turned laptop 2 off last, so that's why these guys are showing up. 10.0.12 is switch 1, which is here. And then remember, we did all that work on the router right in here, where we brought loopback interface 99 up and then down, and then up and then down. And so now we're receiving much, much better information. So one last comment, and let me check the router here. Let me see if that's, I'm really curious. Do show logging, and it's still not buffering those messages. So that, and again, I'm not sure as to why it would be not logging that. Do show run. It should be logging that. It should be logging that, but it is not. So that's okay. So we'll come over here, and I want to talk real quickly about the service sequence numbers, because these are the sequence numbers. And my settings, oops, I like to make sure that on my settings I've got the service sequence numbers, right? Which what that's going to do, it's going to go ahead and when the log messages go in, it's going to stamp it with a sequence number so that you know where that took place. So service sequence numbers is a good one to have configured. Another one is the logging count, so that you can see, I believe it's show logging count. Yeah. So if I type show logging count, right? Excuse me. Getting over a sore throat here. If I type show logging count, this is a great way to get sort of a consolidated look. I'm trying to think of a better word. I guess a consolidated look at all of the different facilities and the severities and how many of them have occurred. So let's take a look here. So the facility parser, right? Config log, log command, that's considered severity 5, notification. It's occurred 11 times. The last time it occurred was today, right? Not too long ago. IL power, right? So power granted. So the IL stands for inline power, because this switch that I'm on provides PoE, power, to access points that are plugged into it, Cisco access points. So power granted. Well, that's also at the notification level, and let's take a look. That goes way back. In fact, that was, it looks like I may have been plugging things in before I set my time, because I have not had this switch since 2006. And so again, as you look through here, it's really nice output. Like I said, it consolidates what you would have to, if you have to dig through the log to try to figure it out. I can come in here real quick and say, okay, for SSH, how many SSH2 sessions have I had closed out, right? Shows me the severity level is 5, notification, and there have been 2 that have been closed out. How many user authorizations have there been? 3. How many SSH sessions? 3. So again, that's going to increment as soon as this session that I'm SSH into terminates, right? Excuse me. Security login, right? Login success, login failure. And this is, again, this count right here, this is being tabulated from the last time the switch was rebooted, which I actually did a quick upgrade today. So you can see I've only been up for 7 hours and 40 minutes because I bumped up to the 15.2.2E2 code, right? So, but again, I really enjoy the show logging count command because it, again, correlates and consolidates. There's a better word, I just can't think of it. So it correlates and consolidates everything for you from a syslog perspective on the switch that you can come in, because if you see you've got, occurrences of something here that's like, 1,000 or 1,500 or whatever, and you're not anticipating that that's what you're supposed to have, then you could dig in a little further and take a look in. And again, if I were to see here SSH sessions and say, this doesn't look right, why have there been 3 user authorizations? I'm the only one who's logged in, and I've only logged in 1 time, ever. So at that point, that's where you want to dig in. You're going to type in show logging. And I can roll down here, and let's see, I'm looking for the SSH facility, right? So here's security login, so here we go. I can take a look at this and see, okay, so here's my SSH facility. I can see who was trying to log in, TP bond fee, what the crypto cipher was that was being used, and I can get additional information. And now I've got where they're coming from. So now I can go track that down to find out, hey, why are you trying to log in as this user from this workstation? And that's, again, another way to get you a little more information, and that was logging count, right? Logging count. Okay. Well, that definitely wraps up this packet tracer tutorial for 8.1.2.5, where we've been configuring syslog and NTP. And actually, excuse me, one final thing before we go, I want to talk about SNMP, because I actually ran into this the other day. So by default, if I type show run include SNMP, and I hit enter. Again, this router is bare bones. I just reloaded it. It's blank slate. You'll notice that SNMP is not configured by default. And in fact, I'm not, if something were to happen, there are no SNMP traps being sent to a trap server, right, at all. So what I always do as sort of a best practice is I say SNMP server enable, right? You can see a lot of options here. Enable, and when I type question mark, it says traps. Excuse me. I type question mark, so these are the traps I can pick from, right? So if I wanted to, let's go down here to a common one that we've talked about quite a bit. Whoop, EIGRP in there. It's scrolling right off the screen. So we'll come down to OSPF. So any type of OSPF trap that Cisco has a MIB for, that I could generate a trap for, I want to know about those things, right? If I'm running OSPF v3, I want to make sure that that gets trapped, okay? If I was doing MPLS, I want to catch those traps. IKE, right? Internet Key Exchange. If there's something going on, something goes wrong, IPsec, same thing. I want to generate SNMP traps, but by default, none of this is on. So there's two schools of thought. The first is that I can pick and choose from here the things that I'm actually using. So I would type in IPsec, excuse me, and then again I could drill down as to what exactly it is I want to trap on. Or instead of having to go through and pick and choose certain things, you could just say SNMP-server enable traps and hit enter. Now this is okay. It says the next hop resolution protocol. This is related to DMVPN. It says the MIB is not enabled, trap generation suppressed. However, configuration changes effective. So let's take a quick look here with a do show run. And remember, there was nothing on here before. So here we go. So take a look at everything that we're trapping. And I'll sort of wrap it up, excuse me, wrap it up by saying that, again, there's two schools of thought. The first is that you only enable the things that you're actually running on the system. The school of thought that I prefer is issue the command SNMP-server enable traps and enable everything, because there's no overhead involved with enabling everything. And I want to see if for some reason something does generate an SNMP trap. I want to trap everything on this server and capture that information so that I have it. I don't want to run the risk of not enabling a specific trap with a specific option and miss out on what could be, you know, a very informative message that I would get. And so you can see here, again, I want the most comprehensive strategy to capture cast the widest net, and so then that's it right there. It ends up here with the VRFs up down. So even though we're not running MPLS VPN, right, that's okay. It doesn't hurt me to have this sitting here. And I've set this up probably a million times on routers all the way back to 2500 series routers, 2600 series. And again, the overhead is non-existent with having these things configured and waiting. The benefit is that if for whatever reason something did go wrong, you're gonna grab this. And this is what I ran into recently in one of the production environments I'm in. Excuse me, was where they had actually turned on. This was the only trap right here. It was SNMP enable traps TTY. This was the only trap that had been turned on a series of 10 to 12 routers inside this specific pod, and they wanted to know why SolarWinds was broken. And I said, could you give me some more information? They said, well, we've had interfaces that are going up and down, and the only way we're finding out that the interfaces are going up and down is when the traffic is getting dropped. And it's a crisis, right? So I jumped on the router, took a look, and sure enough, they only had the SNMP server enabled traps TTY. So they were only catching SNMP traps on TTY, and it made perfect sense because they didn't have this trap enabled, right? Link down, link up, cold start, warm start, right? So this is the trap right here that's going to catch interfaces going up and down, that's going to fire an alert to my SolarWinds server that's going to show up as a red notification in my console that I'm looking for. And again, that's one of those cases where maybe the understanding at the time was the administrator thought, hey, we'll just put enable traps TTY, and then that's going to capture everything we need, when it won't, right? That's only going to alert you on TTY related SNMP traps. So again, I always err on the side of caution, and I enable every trap whether I'm using it or not, because you never know down the road if someone said, oh yeah, well, we need to do IPsec tunnels. Well, you may be so wrapped up in the IPsec tunnel configuration that you forget to go back in and enable these traps. And that's why it's great. Turn everything on, make sure it's all there in place, ready to go, Because again, maybe someone gets on there and tries to configure an IPsec tunnel and they're not supposed to be doing that. You want that information, right? So that's just a quick note on SNMP, because there is no, this is the only packet tracer activity for Chapter 8. So it doesn't look like there is an SNMP activity. All right. So this actually wraps up packet tracer tutorial for 8.1.2.5. And I will see you all on Saturday for your hands-on final and your written final exams. Have a great week.